of known for we stick our fingers in our ears and we don't engage in scholars. So scholars are going to come along and they're going to tell us things about the dating of the Bible that we disagree with, or they're going to tell us things about miracles that we disagree with. And they're all atheists and they're all corrupt and they're all agents of the devil. And so let's just stick our fingers in our ears and ignore them and read your Bible. And this is what it says. And the ways in which the evangelicals started to try to move into that space academically seem to be that we're going to engage the academy. We're going to try to come out of our bunker and really sort of like try to engage them. And we're going to make the case in the mainstream of the academy, in the halls of the academy. We're going to make the arguments and defend our position. Now, I think while I'm all for that, right? Like I'm all for engaging the academy. There was also something that was kind of weird strategically that opened up there. And I can't help but wonder if this was the seeds of something that became, bore some of the fruit that we're now seeing leading to the demise of evangelicalism, which was rather than arguing against the fundamental assumptions of the academy, the best way to engage the academy was to grant their premises. So let's grant everything that you say about okay, so I used to joke when I would have students come to me and they'd be fascinated with ancient philosophy or medieval philosophy and patristics. And so they're now sort of having this mind-opening experience about how they look at theology. They'll say, Dr. Jacobs, what do you think about biblical studies? And because they're taking a New Testament class, and I'd be like, oh, you mean that discipline where you read the Bible like you're an atheist? And they say, and the reason is exactly that. When you look at the way biblical studies functions, it embraces a functional atheism. And it's more than just a functional atheism. It's not like it's saying, well, we're agnostic about whether there's God. We're agnostic about whether this could be inspired. It's actually actively atheistic in the sense of we favor a certain type of narrative about the history of humanity and about the history of religion. And it's highly cynical. We presume religion is, a political utility. And so therefore the most subversive and dishonest motives are the most likely motives of authors. Right? We presume that humanity, it's always got this out of German idealism, actually. It's always got this bias for the present. We're obviously smarter than those dumb backwater hicks who used to, think this and this. Nobody could possibly believe that. And so whichever interpretation makes them sound the dumbest, that's preferable. They can't be too sophisticated because we know they're not sophisticated, right? They're not like us. They're not Germans, right? That's and so there's a lot of these sort of biases in biblical studies and that are not just functional atheism where we're going to try to put on the shelf the question of God. It's actively atheistic where you're being highly negative. And so in this way, what you would start to see, though, is you'd see evangelicals who, behind closed doors, between you and me, of course I believe in God, of course I believe it's inspired, of course. But now when I engage the atheists, I'm going to play on their terms. So I'm going to see if I can grant all of their cynical premises and yet somehow make the case that Paul is still the author of this, or somehow make the case that Paul really did believe that Jesus was divine, or whatever it is, right? And that seemed to be the game that the evangelicals played in order to try to win back intellectual integrity. And then obviously there was also this massive philosophy of religion movement, most of which started out of Calvin College. That's actually the reason I was drawn to Calvin in the first place, was all of these folks that I knew were sort of revitalizing Christian philosophy of religion. And they were doing it in very interesting ways, right? And so people like Alvin Plantinga and Nicholas Walterstorff and others who I'd eventually get to meet and know, a lot of those folks they started at Calvin and then, like Kraft as well, like you mentioned, that they eventually went elsewhere, Yale, Notre Dame, whatever, but it all seemed to be bubbling out of those waters there. And so I'd seen this sort of interesting thing where it was the evangelicals were so hungry to gain not just cultural ground, but also academic ground, that they ended up saying, well, let's play on the atheist terms and let's go ahead and make the arguments from the atheist terms, and let's see if we can still sort of gain back ground for our positions without having to invoke God or confessions or anything like that. So there was a lot of that happening. And some of that was very even intentional in the sense that I didn't go to Biola. I was up for a job at Biola at one point, a couple of times, but I didn't go to Biola, but I know somebody who went there during the sort of like heyday of the Moreland and, William Lane Craig stuff. And my understanding, at least, this is hearsay, but my understanding is that they were very intentional in their thriving philosophy of religion program there, that they wanted to train up people, get them for their PhDs into like, top tier parts of the academy in order to ultimately plant them in top tier schools to try to turn the tide culturally, because now you've got a devout Christian who really believes these things but is in the in the department of philosophy at Yale or something like that. Like that was part of their agenda. And so I think there was this real push there. Now the question is, how long can you play atheist? um, how long can you play atheist before that seed starts to grow and bear some weird fruit, in your own mind? And so I do think that ironically there was a lot of concessions made based on this approach, right? We're going to embrace the methodological atheism. We're going to embrace even the cynical methodological atheism. And we're going to try to argue for intellectual integrity. And few people, except in philosophy of religion, this is where I think Alvin Plantinga, for example, or Nicholas Walterstorff are exceptions, had the guts to just say like, well, I actually do believe in God. And I think a major part of your argument is not in fact an argument. It's a presupposition that God
Yeah.
doesn't exist. And maybe we should start there.
Yeah.
And I think there was a certain courage that was lacking in that, right? It was an interesting tactic that was being used. But I think there are better ways to just go ahead and head on call out like the methodological assumptions and problems that are going on there.